Okay. So we got a nice intimate group for our live webinar, and for all you guys watching on the recording, welcome to All Brains Belong Vermont's Brain Club, our second Brain Club, where we are joined by Hannah Bloom, an occupational therapist with particular expertise in sensory processing, also president of our board of directors here at All Brains Belong. And I'm Mel Houser, executive director of All Brains Belong. And today we're going to talk about more on the last week. Of course, we talked about how everyone flips their lid. And sometimes we know what makes us flip our lid and sometimes we don't. And many people have an impact on their lid flipping based on response to the environment that most of us have no idea about. So that's what we're going to talk about today. Just as a reminder that, all ways you want to participate today are totally fine. Video off, video on, whatever you want. You don't need to look at the camera if your video's on. You can walk, you can move, fidget, snack, do all the things, and feel free to have people and pets and all the things climbing all over you. That's always okay at AVB events. And you can communicate any way you want. You can raise your hand, you can type. We got somebody monitoring the chat box, or just shout it out. And what I'll do is I'll just give a quick recap for those who missed last week before we start. So last week we covered how everyone flips their lid, and we talked about all of the different things that can make us feel stressed out. From physical responses, and here I've got some pictures of two people covering their ears. We'll talk a lot more about that today. Strong emotions, got a picture here with the guy flipping his lid with his fists clenched. Cognitive thinking demands. We've got a kid here with lots of math and stuff all around him. Or social things, like I've got a bully cornering a smaller child. We also talked about how having an awareness of the different factors that make us feel calm is really important for our own self-regulation in those same categories. So today, we're going to zoom in on how the physical environment and input that comes in from the environment impacts our stress. You want to walk us through it, Hannah?
Sure. So the part one will go over how our brain handles information from the surroundings, kind of a quick overview of our sensory system. I have a couple of daily life examples from home and school to kind of give us a narrative, a picture of how different nervous systems respond to the sensory world. And then we'll work a little bit on identifying our own brain's sensory responses and some ideas about how to specifically tease out what happens within our own nervous systems and brains dependent on our sensory environment, on the things around us. And then we'll have some time for problem solving, both being able to go through an example of problem solving, looking at the sensory system and looking at what can you do ahead of time, what might we be able to do during an overload, and what do we do after the overload.
All right, we'll get started. Part one, information comes, we're taking in information all the time, taking it in, processing, and doing something with it. Hannah, can you teach us about this? How does this all go down?
So the idea of sensory processing is pretty much exactly what the input, processing, output. So our sensory system, our brain, which has all the working parts of the integration, of the understanding, of the computation of the sensory environment, is that kind of chief operator. So we're taking input from kind of, the traditional five senses that everybody remembers from kindergarten: smell, hearing, tasting, sight, touch. And then there's two that have been added to this. There's proprioceptive input and vestibular input. Those two in particular are movement-based. So vestibular is the movement when your head gets out of vertical. So anytime you twist, turn, somersault, go upside down, that movement of your head in particular, that vestibular system in your head communicates to your brain. Proprioceptive input is any in all of our joints or in our articulation. When that gets pressure, that gives information to the brain. So those two movement systems have really been discovered and used in both understanding what might be stressing me out in that sensory system, driving in the car, getting my head out of vertical to wash my hair, what might be calming within those systems, and then how we respond when we receive that information is the output. The other one that Mel talks about a lot, and we at All Brains Belong are really trying to bring into light, is the neuroceptive perception and sensory system. And that's really looking at what is the interconnectedness from nervous system to nervous system, and what does that perception of either safety or threat within that interconnected interbrain space, how does one's nervous system, how does my sensory system respond when I am receiving that information? So kind of the ninth sense, maybe we'll start adding it, right, Mel?
Absolutely, and not depicted in this image, which shows just to describe for folks viewing with a screen reader. So we've got this this brain with pictures to symbolize 7 of these senses, but it's missing, not only missing neuroception, that threat detective system, but it's missing interoception. And interoception is your detection of these internal signals. And I think that gets out of whack, I think, because of all of these senses interacting, right? And if people are not meeting their needs for movement, or their, just like your nervous system sending all of these signals and processing them as intended, if you don't notice your internal body signals, or you might not notice you're hungry or thirsty until you're really hungry or really thirsty. So that's why I'm always so hangry, because I don't feel it until I get a lot of input from my interoceptive system. And that, I think, drives some of the brain-body disconnect that we see in so many people. Do you have thoughts on that?
Absolutely. So, and the other piece of information in that, so interoception we're missing on this one, and neuroception we're missing on this one, and all of our sensory systems go in through the lower part of our brain, and in that lower part of the brain, there's a decision that gets made. Do I respond reflexively, or can this go up into my thinking brain? And so there's this gatekeeper, and sometimes with interoception, that gatekeeper is stronger than, okay, the information goes up into my thinking brain. So stuff that feeling, because I'm so stressed out in my thinking brain about organizing, about finishing my math worksheet, about noticing what is potentially a threat in my environment from some competitive game going on in my classroom, that the hunger, the thirst, the need to pee or poop, the void gets to the middle of the brain, and the middle brain says, nope, we don't have the capacity to do this. Send it back down reflexively, sphincters close, reflexively, blood gets drawn away from the gut, digestion slows. So all of those systems go through that gatekeeper. And interoception is one that maybe nobody outside of that body has a chance to understand, because it's all internal. So the gut sends this message, go poop. The message just gets stuck at the midbrain, too stressed, no time, working on a safety thing. All of a sudden back to the gut, fluid gets leached out, poop gets stuck, sphincters close. All of that is a reflexive loop inside the body that sometimes doesn't even get noticed until it becomes a communication that's a different communication than for my kiddo. Then it becomes this like, real deep anger.
Yeah, and that's common. And I think that, many people will share, either for themselves or their child, oh, when, little Johnny has a good poop, then he's like so much more at ease, or, they're so they're so cranky when they haven't pooped in many days. I mean, it's all one nervous system. It goes everywhere. And it's when we're not meeting our needs or responding to triggers in the environment that we don't realize are putting us in that state of fight or flight, like we talked about last week. You can't even make decision, even if something gets to the level of upstairs brain to make a decision about how to handle it, you're not even necessarily making an informed decision because you don't know what it is. Or you think it's something, but it's not. I remember, and we'll go through some daily life examples, but I'll just mention, as a kid, I would constantly flip my lid when I was in a crowded place. And I thought it's because, oh, she's anxious around people, she's got social. I'm flipping my lid because of how loud it is and how visually cluttered it is. I have the kind of brain that is taking in so much information that I get overloaded all the time. But I didn't know that's what it was from. And when we don't bring this level of sensory processing into conversations, we end up problem solving something that's not really what's happening. You know what I mean?
So to kind of sum up this slide, again, the input. So we're receiving information externally from kind of objective, tangible information from those traditional five senses. We're receiving information internally from movement and from body function. And we're also receiving information energetically, for lack of a better word, neuroceptively, information about perceived threat or safety in our environment. And all of those go through the gatekeeper and can either get up into this cognitive level part of the brain, or they get reflexively returned to the body for an output. So that's the processing. And then the output are things that we see as communication, and being able to read those outputs as communication and problem solve with whoever it is or with yourself, of what are when this output happens, let's see what it is. What could it be? So for right now in COVID, being a little human going through the days of being in school, to kind of walk through the potential of all of those different sensory systems and all of that influx of information being flooded into the brain via the gatekeeper, we'll put ourselves into the idea of like a 7-year-old heading to school. And there's a lot in this sensory world right now, more than I think we really give credit to these kids for dealing with. Wearing a mask, having all of the pieces of your day so strictly compartmentalized because of the fear. So there's that neuroception. We are all anxious about COVID in the system, in the schools. Teachers are scared, other parents are scared, other students are scared. So you're walking into a situation where we can maintain safety and we can cognitively have conversations about being safe within COVID, but neuroceptively, we are all feeling that fear. Schools are chaotic in and of themselves anyways. Sound bounces off of walls and floors and ceilings. There's a number of students coming through. Your brain might perceive threat because being touched is really uncomfortable. And then you're in a hallway with all the other students and they might come close to you, and that is a perceived threat. So that touch response. The lights, the fluorescent lights, have a constant hum. There is this constant drone of fluorescent lighting in schools. You're looking at multiple different systems of organization. So visually, you walk in and yes, your desk could potentially be a safe spot for your brain because you can organize it, but you don't have any control over what goes on the walls. You don't have any control over the streamers that might be hanging down. And so you're walking into a visual situation where there is somebody else is making decisions about the visual environment that you're in. Again, the mask changes the way your olfactory system works. So your smells are going to be changed based on wearing the mask, and your taste is going to be changed by wearing the mask. So the sensation in your mouth is drastically different when you're not getting to swallow and talk and breathe and drink water. Outside of that, what am I missing here?
Well, that's really important, because I think that when we think back to those categories of physical, emotional, cognitive, social that either regulate us or dysregulate us, I know personally, I do not drink water all day long, because when would I do that? I have my N95 on and like all my things. And so I just don't. And, there are so many nervous systems that are so sensitive to even subtle levels of dehydration. And remembering that adequate hydration is a prerequisite for dopamine synthesis. Like, you're literally not going to be able to make that brain chemical that helps you focus, orient, move, like everything. And it can be so subtle. And I think that by bringing some awareness into input from the environment actually impacting you is so important, because nervous systems cope. We cope. We figure it out. We are figuring out what to block out. I'm gonna try to tune out that buzzing light. I'm gonna try to focus on this visual thing and not see the overcluttered wall. I need more proprioception, so I'm gonna like fidget, or I'm gonna get up and move all around, and maybe I'm gonna run around the classroom. I'm gonna find a way to regulate. But if we're not looking at through that lens, it just looks and feels like chaos. And then what ends up happening is, you hold it together, you regulate, you make your brain work so hard to get what you need, to block it out or seek more of it. And then what happens? You come home and you flip your lid. Here we got a picture on the right side, a little girl with her mouth open, screaming. This is what happens. And I think that when there's lid flipping going on, whether it be a child or an adult or multiple people in the household, usually it's about what happened just then that triggered it. It's not necessarily that what's happening right now. It's like the cumulative impact of taxing one's nervous system from having to take in, process, modulate all that information throughout the day.
Another piece in the sensory processing that we look at is what's called thresholds. And so how much input does one's brain need in order for that input to register? When it comes to smells, it's like this much for me. You give me this much of a smell of something that I think is disgusting and I'm over, I smell it. For somebody else, it might be this much. How much vestibular system do you need for it to register? How much movement do you need in order for that to register in your brain? So if I spin around and spin around and spin around, I'm okay, I can stop. If Mel spins around, it's like a half a rotation and she says, nope, brain's done, turn it off. So our vestibular systems have very different thresholds. And a lot of kids, a lot of students have the capacity to hold their threshold at a high stress level all day long because it's the social norm and because there is this default need and want to be accepted and within those norms. And so when we get home and our threshold has been like taxed and taxed and taxed, all of a sudden that one thing is enough that our nervous systems are then saying, I can't, I'm out of my capacity. But you think about all day long how much of this has been building toward that threshold of the end.
Right. There's a question in the chat, Hannah, about vestibular input in particular, the example being given that when there's a lot of car sickness that goes on, from the vestibular input that goes on in a car. Any suggestions for managing that? And I know we'll do more specific problem solving. I just want to make sure we answer this question.
Yeah, the vestibular, so you said the music and snacks and cold air sometimes help. In particular, when it's hard to have the generally proprioceptive input. So that heavy work in your joints or having a heavy blanket on your lap or on your chest or on your shoulders, that is often calming to most nervous systems. That is that response into your midbrain of you're safe. And then you can, because your brain feels safe, you can process the noxious stimuli a little bit better. It doesn't get rid of the vestibular car sickness, dizzy feeling, but it allows your brain to process it in a stronger way. So music, snacks, cold air, a weighted blanket or a weighted stuffy on the lap, a visual point on the horizon can make a difference. So if you can take off, if your child's sitting in the back seat, if you can take off the headrest of the passenger side seat, if there's not a passenger riding, it's not safe if there is somebody, but if there's nobody in your passenger side, if you can take the headrest off that seat, that child has a better visual view of the front windshield and to find something on the horizon to look at. And you can play I Spy games or give them some direction toward, oh, you know what, I'm noticing that the sun is setting, let's look at that. Or, hey, look, there's some clouds right up there. What do you think they look like? That can give the brain a fixation that changes how much of the flying by information is in an attempt to understand. Does that make sense?
The other thing that I can say as someone who has had, 37 years of car sickness, is that visual anchor point thing is a game changer, because I can drive when I'm the driver because I have to be looking at that focal point on the horizon or I'm going to crash my car, but I cannot sit in any other seat in the car. And so, highly recommend. And, working with an occupational therapist and I think everybody should have an OT. I mean, I think that what you guys do, Hannah, is magical in terms of helping people understand their nervous systems and how to accomplish the things in one's world that they want to do. And if there are barriers like this, which are common, really problem solving around that.
Yeah. Depending on how old your daughter is, teaching her some pressure point pieces too, like crossing your fingers and kind of pushing on the top of your head can really give you that proprioceptive input. So if you find a fixated point and you give yourself deep pressure on the top of your head or right in that meaty spot between your thumb and your finger, that combined with having a visual cue can very much regulate your sensory processing nervous system.
What we wanted to talk about here is the idea of, and we've got a picture here of a family in chaos. We've got, somebody's on the phone, somebody's trying to pack lunch and leave. We've got 3 kids making a mess, and there's food on the floor and sneakers and cereal and stuff. I mean, if I were in this situation, I would be flipping my lid. I might think about, like if I were going to have upstairs brain interpret my response to lid flipping, it would be about like, I'm in a rush, I got to do the thing, we got to go. But I would be maybe unaware of the fact that, the somebody talking while somebody's yelling and the visual clutter of it. I mean, this is in part a sensory response that I would be having. Like, I remember when I first became a mom, I had this crying baby and like my brain exploded. Like, I had no idea. I mean, obviously, like, nobody wants to hear their baby cry, but it seemed like other people could just, have their baby cry and like they functioned, whereas my brain exploded and I was completely unable to function. And I didn't know anything about sensory processing. So I think bringing that lens and it to one's interpersonal interactions is really important, including, you know, I think a lot of us as parents, there's so much pressure to like be a good parent and like not yell at your kids and all the things. And when we don't have self-awareness of what our triggers are, it's really hard to like use upstairs brain to parent the way I want to parent. Because I'm just so dysregulated. I'm trying to survive. My neuroceptive alarms are going off like, whoa, because of the sound a lot of the time.
So this is, I mean, this picture is a particular, so entryways, bottoms of stairs, tops of stairs, doorways are really hard places and typical places for struggle. So one of the things within the school system, haven't figured it out for my family in my house, but one of the things is to have landing spaces not be transition spaces. So when you come in the front door, that's your transition. Your actual landing spot is not in the same place. So allow that transition spot to be muddy. It's okay. This is just walk through, and then we're actually going to set up our landing spot where we take our boots off, where we have a snack first thing. Come to your landing spot, sit down. Don't even worry about your boots yet. Eat a snack, drink a water bottle. Land, literally. Take time to land. Stop the transition and get to the landing spot. And then that's where the organization of the boots and the hat and the backpack and all of the other pieces, the visual distraction and visual clutter live. So you're taking a really big task, transition, going out the door is a big task, and breaking it down into smaller steps. And the other thing to have, once we kind of problem solve toolboxes, the other thing to have is kind of a sensory toolkit toolbox that can travel between the landing spot and the transition spot. So if there are things that are particularly attractive right now to your sensory system or your children's sensory system, it can live within a basket or a bag, and it kind of goes back and forth between the car. It works for the transition, and then it comes back to the landing spot. And within that landing spot, you kind of have a decision of, do I keep these? Are they working? And just, let each sensory system go through it every once in a while and weed out, this isn't working anymore. I actually want this in. Gum is a huge, a helpful transition tool for most sensory systems. I've been using, I don't have it with me, I've been using a little menthol inhaler as my transition out of and into my mask. So before I put my mask on, I have it in the car and I take a few really calming deep breaths of a smell that I like, and then I put my mask on. Every time I get back in my car or I go outside, it's in my coat pocket, I go right to having that smell that is calming for my nervous system to try to override the noxious stimulus of the mask smell that my threshold has kind of gone up and up and up and up, and I'm almost beyond it.
That's really good advice, because I think that it would be, especially if you're like in the middle of a chaotic day, it's hard to even slow down and recognize that it's the smell of your own breath and mask, that like staleness that if you're sensitive to that and that's noxious, you can't think your way out of it. You can't just be like, upstairs brain can't be like, no, that's not a thing. I mean, you have this limbic response and it is what it is. And there's, you manage it, you manage that because that's your truth. You don't get to pick it. It's limbic. Yeah. And
it goes back to that idea of it being reflexive. Like, it really never gets into your thinking brain. It is very much a reflexive response to a stimuli.
Right. It's almost like, if I'm in my kitchen and I touch the stove, I don't get to be like, it's not hot. It's just like, you just move. And so, but yet so often we've had the experience of, like, I remember even as a little kid being like, it's loud here. Can you turn it down? It's not that loud. it actually is like your sensory system. That's your truth. We have different brains that have different, thresholds.
Yeah.
And that's what can make it really hard if someone's sensory need is to make a lot of noise to regulate because they're getting like vagal tone by humming or buzzing or whatever, and someone else in the family is very sensitive to loud sounds. That's going to be a conflicting access need, and figuring out how to manage that. For in my house, I'm looking around if I can grab them. I will in a second. Is I wear headphones at the kitchen table like all the time because I am a calmer, more present mama when I have headphones in. I'm participating in conversation. They're not like blocking out everything, but they're dampening it so that I'm not overflowing my auditory cup, if you will.
Yeah, no, and there's another comment in the chat about how sound is also huge for me as a parent, and maybe the biggest issue. And I just figured out at 38 years, and this is such a helpful conversation I can't find anywhere else. Yeah, and that's this. The normalizing sounds like a hard word. That's this just. We all have different sensory systems. Like we all have different responses to the world around us, and there should not be this default understanding of this is, just do this thing. Like, no, I actually, my sister used to wear really expensive perfume, and then she would hold my baby, and then she'd give me back my baby, and I would be like, oh my God, I can't do that smell. It's not, absolutely nothing to do with me being able to think through it and say like, it's okay, it's just a perfume. So that was the conversation that we had to have. And then there's also, the noise canceling headphones. They just wear them. They are a part of our world. Visual pieces, like if the visual clutter is an access need or an access clash in family, assign spaces, give permission for spaces to be individual. So playroom is playroom, and it stays as disastrous as everybody wants it to be, and that's joyful and exciting. Our transition space is not. I need to sweep it, clean it, organize it, mittens go in the mittens box, and that's an access clash. And I recognize it's my job to do that organization, as it is my sensory need to have it done.
In my house, we've been talking about this since my child is like 2.5. We all have different brains, and the way I explain it, to my child and to all my really young patients is it's almost like we think about this list to this table here with with all the different senses. We like think about each of those being a cup, and we all have different size cups. And my sound cup is like this big. I really can't have a lot of it. Movement, I really like. I like heavy pressure. I like to move and walk and the proprioceptive kind of stuff, but I cannot move my head. That vestibular cup is like this small. Whereas my child has a really big vestibular cup, constantly swinging and flipping and upside down and all the things. And in fact, when my child doesn't get that input, it's like floppy baby can't hold their head up anymore. And that happens all the time. Like I think about like walking in the preschool room and like so and so sprawled out on the on the floor, and I sprawled out on the table. That's a child needs vestibular input. People don't even know what that is most of the time. And so thinking about that as like a really important building it in to add when you wake up in the morning. If you have the kind of brain that has a big vestibular cup, you got to get your vestibular input before you leave the house, before you take on something really stressful like the complex executive functioning of leaving the house in the morning. And whatever that's going to look like, that's going to be very individualized. And that's why working with an occupational therapist can be really helpful. Although I'd also say that often what you gravitate toward, you like are finding a way to regulate. And that's the thing, nervous systems find a way to regulate until they're invalidated by the people in the environment around you. But how many times do you like stumble upon someone who's biting their fingernails, chewing gum all the time? That is someone who needs oral movement. And so do that, you know, if you see a kid or an adult biting their nails, oh, stop that, stop. You can just stop that. It's sensory. Your body's saying regulate, need to regulate. And so you can replace it with something that's not going to give you COVID. You know, you can chew gum, you can have, you know, jewelry, you can have, you know, like just problem solving to meet the specific sensory need can be, you know, is so important. Quick example, in my house last night, you know, there was some like, you know, mindless while watching TV, you know, my child was like picking lips. And so I went and I grabbed some stickers, like those gel stickers, like the little clingy thing, and he's picking that, and it was amazing. And so rather than just say like, stop doing that thing, stop picking your lips, you know, it's thinking about what is the need that nervous system's trying to get to. There a baby coming to say hi?
There is. There's a nervous system who's trying to get to their need.
Hi. I love this baby. Hi, Brooke. This was we were gonna pause for a minute, and we can problem solve specific situations. We'll give a quick summary first, actually, just in case, to recap where we were, and then we can back up and help folks with specific questions. You know, just we all have different brains that take in and process information differently, and you can't like upstairs brain your way out of it. You can't be like, oh, that's not loud. No, that doesn't smell bad. You know, you cannot think your way out of it. You feel what you feel. Hannah, what's that quote you said before that was so good about that? You know, you don't have to think things.
So that the trope of, you know, you don't have to believe all your thoughts, but you do have to feel all your feelings, and your brain can't not feel what it's feeling. And then that's you don't talk yourself out. You don't think yourself out of a sensory response. Our brains don't.
Yeah, and being aware of those sensory responses, recognizing that they're potentially even sensory related. So, you know, when you're flipping your lid afterwards, okay, what was that? Oh, you know, it was really loud and chaotic here. You know, oh, there was that smell in the back corner, you know, like just being aware of that. And so once you can recognize your sensory based responses, you can collect your sense of triggers, and then you can problem solve around them to make life more comfortable. Whether that be at, you know, at school, at home, at your workplace, out in the community. And I can tell you, as someone who has these conversations all day long, like this is what people talk about in my office. You know, I think people think sometimes that we're the only people, but guess what? Every single brain is taking in and processing sensory information. It's just, you know, a thing. You know, if it would be helpful to talk through, you know, specific problem solving, sensory based problem solving that contributes to regulation in environments that you're in, we're happy to take chats, either, you know, questions in the chat box or verbally, or any other questions that you have.
I'm going to try to find a resource that I've used in the past from the alert program that's a checklist. So I'm doing a little bit of distraction if you see my eyes going elsewhere.
Speaking of eye contact, that's something worth bringing up, I think. You know, from a visual processing standpoint, there are many brains for whom eye contact is uncomfortable. That's one. There's also brains that, because all of this, I'm going to just scroll back real quick to that input thing here. You know, these wires are crossing a lot of the time. They're like separate highways that have to kind of like meet up, and, you know, your car's got to get off the interstate on the exact same, you know, the 16 highways that are going. It's almost like, because there are some brains who actually hear better and process auditory information better when you're not looking at something. It is very common to see people look away from their conversational partner because they're actually listening better. But then, because they're sometimes, often, there is not a sociocultural awareness that we have different brains. There's like judgment, like, oh, you're not making eye contact with me when you talk. That's the way you got to do it. And that's just, it's not a thing. So, I think even with little kids, you can have these conversations, you can offer scripts that are, self-advocacy tools. So, I've taught my 5-year-old to say, hey, I have the kind of brain that listens better when I'm looking away. That's it. It's not a big deal. I do that with patients all the time. I've never, I think when maybe if I look away if I didn't tell someone why I'm looking away while they're talking to me, they might follow my gaze sometimes to see what I'm looking at. But otherwise, if I explain what I'm doing, I'm actually looking, then it's fine. I think, it's kind of like the adults in meetings who are knitting while they're listening to a meeting. Like there are some brains that when getting proprioceptive input or tactile input, they actually listen better and pay attention better. It's a focus tool.
Yep.
So if there are other, I'm trying to think about other daily life examples. Oh, another chat. Okay. Yeah, multitasking to take in sound and people at the same time. The comment in the chat further goes, I can look at people while I hear them, but struggle to form my own thoughts when looking at people's eyes. Oh my goodness, that is so common. So common. I don't know if you know how common that is. Actually, one of our other members of the board of directors frequently observes that when I'm coming up with a brand new thought, I very specifically look to the left. And like that's what you get when you have occupational therapists on your board of directors who notice these things. But it's common. It's common, and like just people. I think the reason people don't talk about it is because they don't know about it.
And then there's the other big piece of processing time, and being able to advocate for your processing time, or as a educator or as a facilitator, being able to advocate for differing processing times within groups. There are people who, if they're not cutting you off, then they're not listening. And there are people who, yep. if Mel and I are having a conversation and she hasn't actually like finished my sentence or interjected with a question really quickly, then I say, why is Mel not here? But then there are people who need and work well with that 5 to 10 second delay after of, okay, I heard everything that was said, and now I'm thinking about what my thoughts are and how to put my thoughts into verbal language.
That's a common conflicting access need in families, for sure, that I spend a lot of time talking about with people in the office, because many brains are maxed out on working memory, like the little index card in your brain that you keep for the 30 seconds of your awareness. You have a thought, it comes to working memory, and many people need to blurt it out before they forget it. And the angst and anxiety knowing the past or forgetting your thoughts, if you don't have like a whim board or like somewhere to put it or scribble it, you lose it and then you're stressed out about it. And so there's the blurting out combined with the active listening. Like if I'm not like right there, then I'm not there. But then there's the people who, if they lose their thought and get distracted when they get interrupted, they flip their lid because of that. They had that idea, they got interrupted by the quote impulsive interrupter, but that's really auditory processing differences. The interrupter, flip my lid, you always interrupt me, and like explosion, interpersonal conflict. This is like what goes on all day for people with, and this it's sensory processing. And often by meeting other sensory needs, like you can't see, but in my office, I'll go grab it in a second. We have these weighted lap pads. I find so much that when people are getting their proprioceptive input, they're not as impulsive. It's like things are just kind of organized more if you have the kind of brain that needs that input. Some people are the opposite, like they can't have any proprioceptive input. It's really just about kind of working with an occupational therapist. I can't recommend more highly to kind of figure out the nuances of what kinds of input is helping, and what are the accommodations in your own environment that can make a difference for your your mental and physical health. Reading the chat, multitask. I read this again. Mommy, stop interrupting me. Oh my goodness, every day in my house, every day. Earlier, Hannah talked about neuroception, and my child tells me that when I interrupt, I am violating her freedom and choice. And so I taught that language about autonomy, because that's a trigger. You energy, even like looking like I'm gonna interrupt would trigger, because it's energy. It's like
I know you're having a thought, Mama. I know you are.
But that actually is another conflicting access need. So when you have the kind of brain that is so sensitive to people's energy, you almost think that, and I see this a lot with patients, like you think you can mind read because you're picking up energy. And I think the corollary is that people who do that often think that their thoughts can be mind read. It's like I spend so much time in the office trying to teach kids that people actually can't read your thoughts. I'm like, what are you talking about? I can read yours. Right. You're having angst. And that's what goes on.
Yep. Yeah. That neuroceptive within the classroom is so intense, because there are, a handful of students who have that capacity, who are clairvoyant. They really are. And so their perception of the world around them is so astute and clear. And yet there are so many social default norms that are painful that they stop believing those internal neuroceptive understandings.
I'd like to just to interject to that point. I think what happens for kids a lot, because when I'm as a primary care doc who mostly takes care of kids and adults who think, learn, communicate differently than the quote neuromajority, I think this brain-body disconnect that you're alluding to, where one loses the ability to trust their internal signals, I think that starts like from day one of life, and just you're in this path, and if you are wired such that even you don't feel your facial muscles the same as other people, or you're like prioritizing, you don't feel your face when you hear this sound, and therefore when you're happy you might have like a flat face and not a smiley face, but you think you're smiling because you don't feel it. And an adult, my personal experience having a face as such is like, oh, why are you so sad? I'm sad, I'm not, I'm like happy. They're like, you look sad. Oh, I guess that's what sad is. And there's like this crossover of learning, like, what are the labels of feelings? Actually, Rachel Dorsey is an autistic speech language pathologist who I think it's dorseyslp.com, like such an incredible resource. I'll put in chat later. And she gave a talk last summer where she talked about that overlap of interoception and alexithymia, or like, difficulty, experience, like identifying the emotions, which is very, very, very common. And like how that overlaps with social communication. It's really, really interesting. And that goes on all day in school. Yep.
I'm just going to share this really fast, and then it'll be a resource that we can share out. But this is the Adult Preference Sensory Motor Checklist from the Therapy Works Inc., adapted from How Does Your Engine Run, or the ALERT program. And I find it a helpful tool for the adults in the world to go through for themselves first, and then to use for understanding the sensory systems of the people around you. So it goes through oral motor input, and you just mark for yourself, does this increase my alertness, my attention to the present moment, or does it decrease my alertness? Or is it sometimes one and sometimes the other? Movement, touch, visual, and auditory. So
that's awesome. What a great resource. One more resource I'll share in the chat is a program called Autism Level Up, which is rather than, because some brains like feeling words don't resonate. It's more like an energy that is, you know, makes more sense to their brains. So it's about, you know, like, you know, so if we could go from like asleep to sleepy to calm to frenetic, you know, like you name whatever words work for you. And it's the idea that like context specific regulation, and figuring out like what would, you know, all energy levels are okay, but you want to have a match between the energy level you're at, the alertness level you're at, and the energy level required for your activity. So like, it's fine to be sleepy. It's not fine to be sleepy while I'm seeing patients. So I need to be aware of like, what are the sensory inputs that, you know, are maybe gonna activate me. Like maybe I'm gonna get up and move, or maybe I'm gonna drink a cold glass of water. I mean, just knowing in that context specific adjustment. So I think, you know, I think that the construct like that benefits all people, whether you're autistic or not. So we got a few more minutes. Probably take like one more question if anybody has any questions. Well, awesome. Zoom is allegedly recording this to the cloud right now, and hopefully that'll work out. It worked out well last week. I hope I clicked the right button, and I'll send this out as a recording. And next week we have a really interesting talk at building on this concept of neuroception. It's going to be about nervous system safety versus threat and demand avoidance, and how that plays into all of our cognitive and interpersonal situations throughout the day. Well, thanks so much for coming. And we've got, you know, in addition to Brain Club, we've got a lot of community center events, most of which are free and virtual at allbrainsbelong.com, and click on the community center link. Put that in the chat too. And if you have any questions at all, you'll have my email address when you get the recording. There's the website. All right, thanks everyone. See ya.
thank you all. Hi, Mel.
Hi. What'd you think? Oh, I gotta hold on. How do I hit record? I have to stop recording. Stop recording. Okay.
Well, good.